Well, there are minor differences, but essentially it's the same thing. It's dressed up to show that it's a new deal, but I think most experts who analyze all the technical details see that it's essentially very similar to NAFTA. There are some changes in terms of rules of origin, some of the labor provisions. Obviously, it's been updated for the digital economy. NAFTA was in the early 1990s. They didn't think about the digital factor as much as, of course, is relevant today. So there have been a couple of things that have been updated and changed, but essentially it's not very different from the NAFTA deal.
What did Mexico not get that it wanted, and what did the U.S. not get that it wanted?
Well, the Mexico did not want to was not interested. This new deal has a lot more monitoring of protection of labor rights in Mexico. And it really goes pretty far, and that was a demand that the Democrats had in order to get Democratic support for this in Congress. That's not something that the Mexican government really likes. And the U.S. was looking for more of a deal that would have a different sunset clause, so that wouldn't be as long as the Mexicans wanted. The sunset clause now is like 16 years, and they wanted a shorter sunset clause. So there were some things on the margins that each of the governments were not happy with. But essentially, there were not huge differences from the previous trade agreement.
After the first NAFTA deal was signed in 1994 under Mexico's then long-ruling PRI, the economy soured. The peso was devalued by some 15%, all in the first year, and the U.S. bailed it out. What can we expect for Mexico 1 year from now? And do Mexicans even want this sort of deal, or have they been forced into a newer version?
No, the polls show that the Mexicans have a favorable view towards this deal. I think the big mistake with NAFTA, and I hope it's not repeated in this deal, is to oversell it. This is a trade deal. Trade did increase significantly after NAFTA. Trade will continue with this deal, but it's not going to resolve the fundamental economic problems in Mexico. In Mexico, according to the IMF, is going to shrink this year by 10.55%. There are profound problems that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think nobody should have any illusions that this is going to solve those problems. For that, you need much different policies on investment and other issues that we haven't seen yet in this López Obrador government. But it is still, the polls show that it is favorably viewed by most Mexicans.
This was the first face-to-face meeting between the two presidents since AMLO took office about a year and a half ago. There has been tension largely over the immigration issue. We heard there in President López Obrador speaking, subtly addressing it, if you will. Could he or should have he said more?
Well, I think most Mexicans think that he should have. I think this has been part of President Trump's message, which has been very aggressive towards Mexican immigrants and also Mexico since he announced his candidacy for the presidency 5 years ago. And I think many Mexicans feel offended. It's interesting, the polls show that the Mexican views towards the United States have become more favorable, but President Trump himself is not well liked in Mexico, and his numbers have gone considerably down. And I think the Mexicans would have expected more for López Obrador to stand up for Mexico. And because it was, I think, so amiable between the two, I think President Trump will use this to his political advantage in this campaign to show, look, I'm not anti-Mexico. Look what the Mexican president said about me and my government. So I think he's going to exploit this for his political advantage as this campaign moves forward.
And very briefly, this is a three-way deal, of course. How significant was Canada's absence from Wednesday's White House event? I
think it was significant. This is a North American deal. and this is not a U.S. Mexico deal. And Prime Minister Trudeau didn't come because of the pandemic and because of fears that that the Trump administration is going to put on aluminum tariffs on Canada. And so there is a bit of tension and unease there. And so I think that was, it's not a complete commemoration of a trade deal by three partners if one of the partners is not president. So I think that was significant. López Obrador encouraged Prime Minister Trudeau to come, but in the end he decided not to. Instead, he would visit Mexico at another opportunity.